If they find out that I have a freelance grant writing business, they may start to treat me differently because they may think I'm going to be leaving soon, right? Like quitting the job, etc. Well, here's the thing. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Hello and welcome to the Grant Writing and Funding Podcast. I'm your host, Holly Rustick, and we are going to be talking about something really spicy today. And that is if you are considering freelance grant writing, but you still have a JOB, right? You still got a 9 to 5, and it might be within a nonprofit. And here's the thing. You're like, my nonprofit, this is your thought. My nonprofit is going to maybe be upset or even possibly fire me if they find out that I open up a freelance grant writing business on the side. Ooh, okay, so why are you having these thoughts? Well, they might come from a valid place. Maybe the nonprofit has said similar weird things like this before. But at the end of the day, unless look at your contract, I'm not a lawyer, do look at your contract. But at the end of the day, for most jobs, what you do in your personal time is your personal time, right? Like that's your personal time. Here's 4 thoughts that you might be thinking your boss at the nonprofit is thinking about if you open a freelance grant writing business. Number 1, oh my gosh, what if they start writing grants for a similar nonprofit and they're actually writing the same grants for us and for them, for their clients? What's going to happen? And they might start freaking out about that. Now, that is a valid question, and that is something for you to consider how you're going to handle that in your business, right? Some folks will be like, ethically, I will just tell my boss, okay, I can still write grants for other places. Other people are competing, right? It's totally fine. But you may have a clause like a non-compete kind of thing in your contract. So do look at that. The other thing is if you feel a little bit weird about that, like I don't want to write for 2 different organizations, especially my employer and another organization that I do in my business to write the same grant for, because then we will be directly competing. I am just going to have a clause that says I won't write those same grants for my clients, right? That could be something that you could easily just make as a policy in your business if you choose to do so. However, side note, I will say when you're a full-time consultant and you don't have an employer, that's something you don't always have to keep if you don't want to. I used to do this because I was known for a certain grant, right? So for a certain federal grant that came up every year, I had written it originally for my employer and I had gotten it awarded, but once I started my full-time consultancy, I still continued because people would come to me. People would still come to me and they'd say, I know you got that grant awarded. Can you write it for us too? So I said, for sure. And then I started getting them awarded too. So I became like known as the girl who gets that grant awarded. And guess what? I would publicly say, I have 5 slots available specifically to write this grant. So they knew, it was very transparent. I'm going to be writing for 5 of you that will compete among each other, right? But sometimes we would actually have multiple clients get that grant that year. That's how good I was at writing that grant. And people were well worth it. Like, okay, yeah, I want one of those slots. Give me one of those slots. So it is to say that when you're a freelance grant writer full-time and you don't have an employer, you can be a little bit more specific. Whether or not you want to keep that policy is completely up to you. But I always say be transparent either way with how you're handling that. But one of the things, if you do have an employer, you may say, okay, I honor that. I'll just write the same grants, or I won't write the same grants for any other organization that I'm consulting with. And that can just be a policy you have until you don't have them as a full-time employer anymore. Okay, question number 2 that you may think that your boss will have if you become a freelance grant writer while you're still working full-time. Is this a conflict of interest? The thing is with conflict of interest in nonprofits, sometimes there is a lot of conflict. Let's even just look at a board of directors. A board of directors needs to have a non-conflict of interest policy because they know conflicts are going to come up. So a conflict of interest for like a board might be if a board director, the nonprofit say is like a soccer organization for youth, and one of the board members owns a athletic store, and they have to buy a bunch of soccer balls, let's say for a soccer camp coming up, and the board member wants them to give a discount, but they have to go through their policy of looking at least 3 vendors. That board member that's going to put their proposal forward for them to buy the balls, right? What they're going to say in their conflict of interest policy is they're going to say, if we do have a conflict such as this, then we're actually going to step away from the room when the vote is even going on. We're not going to participate in that vote as a board member. So in that way, they know conflict is going to arise, but they've set something up in place to mitigate the conflict. Well, that could be the same as you. You could sit down and say, as a freelance grant writer, if I took on clients on the side, what other types of conflicts would come up besides the one we've already talked about, writing the same grant for your employer and for your clients? What other conflicts might come up? I want you to go ahead and brainstorm those and just come up with a policy to mitigate that. That's as easy as it is, y'all. That's as easy as it is. Number 3, another thought that you might be thinking your boss has if you start a freelance grant writing business is, are they going to be working on their business when they're at work? I'm sorry, y'all, but that's just your boss's thought. If they even have that, that's nothing you can really do about it. Obviously, you don't want to work on your business when you're getting paid from your employer, right? That's like double dipping in the grant speak. So you just don't want to do that ethically as a person. Like, don't work on your business when you're getting paid from your employer. I don't really think you even need to say that to them because that should already be something that is known, right? But if you think that they may have that thought, then they might be having other kind of issues, right? So that's okay. And a fourth thought that you might be thinking your boss has is, if they find out that I have a freelance grant writing business, they may start to treat me differently because they may think I'm going to be leaving soon, right? Like quitting the job, etc. Well, here's the thing. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Why don't you just have a candid conversation with where you're at with your boss? Because just because you open a freelance grant writing business is not bad for your boss, for your nonprofit, especially if you're doing grant writing inside your nonprofit. They could actually become your first anchor client as you transition out and start go full time, right? They could be a great client that you have. Maybe you just start taking on all of the grant writing and that's all you do, right? You start to transition out and say, you know what? I am opening this on the side. I am keeping my full time. This is great. But eventually, yeah, maybe this could be something we look at in the future where I'm a consultant and not an employee. Maybe we can have a conversation in 6 months and just see what that looks like. Why don't you just put it on the table? It actually might be more of a budget for them to hire you that way, and they don't want to lose you either. But they can also kind of see where you're going, and that's okay. It's okay to have these types of conversations. Wouldn't you rather have these conversations than just always be thinking they might be thinking about this and they're treating me different and then having all these weird thoughts about that? That's not healthy. By looking at these 4 questions that have just been spinning in your head and you're too afraid to even start your freelance grant writing business because of all the what ifs, why don't we just address them head on? But I also want one caveat as we wrap up this video. And the caveat is to say, does your boss even need to know what you're doing in your own time? Okay, that's another thing. If you don't have that in your contract anywhere, do they even really need to know? What you do in your personal time is what you do in your personal time. I would just say answer those questions still for your own self. But at the end of the day, you might just say, yeah, but Holly, they follow me on LinkedIn and they're going to see me on LinkedIn promoting my business. So they're just going to see it somewhere. Well, you can always open up a business LinkedIn profile page. Are they going to see you there? Maybe not, right? You can always advertise somewhere else. I remember back in the day, right, before we even had social media at work, and when it first started, it was just Facebook, and it was only your friends on Facebook. Like, it was weird when your parents got on Facebook. And it was inappropriate for your bosses to follow you on social. Like, I remember those days. But now it is very prevalent. So I understand where you're at if they do follow you on social media. But a lot of people I see have been taking their personal social media and just leveraging it for their employers. And I think we still need to have some kind of division in that, and that's okay to have. If you are promoting your business and just under a business account, completely different. But a lot of employers are taking advantage of their employees who are just then all of a sudden, because they're employed there, they become like a spokesperson, and their social media is a spokesperson front for that company. That's really not what it is. It's still a personal account. All right, so those are things to consider as well. But if you're feeling any fear about opening a freelance grant writing business, I hope this video helped you alleviate that fear of your 9 to 5 finding out. And it's okay if they find out, and those are ways that you can mitigate that conversation. We go over so much more inside the Freelance Grant Writer Academy on helping you transition from a 9 to 5 into a freelance grant writing business safely and responsibly. So if you want to find out more, check out the description below, and please make sure you subscribe.